All right. Thanks for joining us this morning. So we do have a few new members to join the group today. So 4 new members, we'll introduce you first, and then we'll give you guys an opportunity to say hello if you would like to. So first off, we have Kendall Donahue and Barry Potter from OMAFA, Ali Digantana from University of Guelph, Matab Udin from University of Guelph, Udak Edet from University of Guelph, and Steve Slothuber from Ember Ops. I do apologize if I butchered anyone's last name. I did my best there. So if any of the people who are joining today, that is your name, please feel welcome to turn on your camera and introduce yourself. All right, and I don't see any of those names on, so Steve is here. Steve, if you'd like to, you're welcome to introduce yourself, but no pressure if you don't want to.
Yeah. Hi. Sorry, I'm a little late to join here, but yeah, my name's Steve Slothuber. I'm from the automation industry. I also grew up on a farm in Perth County, so I'm super interested in the AgRobotics sector. So I had a great conversation with Joe Dales last week, and he mentioned that I should come in and join this group and get some knowledge about what you guys are doing. So a little bit of background about my company. My company, Ember Ops, we help bring businesses in the automation space, advanced manufacturing, bring their internal processes to the cloud using a platform called Zoho. And so we streamline their whole internal processes and really focus on sales and growing and putting the right systems in place for growth. So thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, and nice to meet you, Steve. Thanks for joining us this morning. All right, so we are going to get into our presentation. So I am going to introduce to you Amy LeMay from Vista Science and Technology. She's going to be speaking on determinants of adoption of automation and robotics technology. Amy, if you want to go ahead and add your slide or bring up your slides, and I will do your introduction while you're doing that. Okay. So Amy has been a science analyst advisor and founder of Vista Science and Technology. She's been providing strategic expertise to the Canadian agri-food sector for more than 25 years to drive discovery, development, commercialization, acceptance, and adoption of agri-innovation. She has a PhD in Sociology of Science and Research from the University of Toronto, Masters of Science in Entomology, and a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and Environmental Biology from the University of Guelph. She's an adjunct professor in the Department of Geography and Tourism and Environmental Sustainability Research Center, and a fellow of the Cool Climate Enology and Viticulture Institute at Brock University. She's chair of the Biosecurity Working Group of the Canadian Plant Health Council and a graduate of the Advanced Agricultural Leadership Program. So Amy, take it away.
I'm just going to check, is my slide showing?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Bridget, for that introduction, and good morning, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to make this presentation. Even though Bridget did my bio, I thought I would just spend a quick minute or two just to talk about a little bit about what I do. And so the overarching sort of focus of my work is on driving the development, commercialization, acceptance, and adoption of agri-innovations. And as Bridget mentioned, I've been doing this for about 30 years now. My business has been around in some iteration since 1998. It's actually a spin-off of Brock University and Niagara College. So on the consulting side, I have 3 sort of service focuses, primarily looking at strategic innovation positioning, which generally involves providing competitive positioning of agri-food research and innovations through technology market and commercialization assessments and research impact assessments. For science communications, I've been getting more and more into doing some freelance science writing on agri-food innovations and also doing some knowledge mobilization. And policy analysis mostly focuses on science, innovation, emerging trends analysis, and policy reviews that support evidence-based decision-making. On the research side, I'm trying to build capacity as an independent researcher, so someone who is a researcher outside of an academic institution. And I've been somewhat successful in that. I just got some funding from the OAFRI fund from OMAFA as a PI through the business. So that's a kind of a first step in building this idea of an independent researcher. My research focuses mainly on applied research, looking at the determinants of adoption of agri-innovations and agricultural knowledge translation and transfer. I've been working on an AgKTT framework now for a couple of years. And I do some basic research that looks at the social ecological dynamics of agricultural innovation systems. And that's so we can better understand how agricultural innovation works and we can get better at it. So that's what I do. What I wanted to start with this morning is to just give you a little bit of context about where this presentation is coming from. I'm thrilled to tell you that we just had a paper accepted into PLOS Sustainability Transformation on this topic. The determinants of adoption of automation robotics technologies in the agri-food sector. I've been working on this paper for about 2 years now. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight was the method that we used. You'll see it's in the title, Mixed Methods, Narrative Interpretive Knowledge Synthesis. So before getting into the findings from this paper, I wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology because I think it's an important method, research method that's not getting enough attention. And I think it's really important as we try to understand adoption and innovation in the agri-food sector. So a knowledge synthesis, also known as a systematic review. It's an umbrella term for a number of different ways that you can, a method for curating, analyzing, and interpreting results from multiple studies or sources, or so from a body of knowledge. And I argue that this is because, based on my research on knowledge translation and transfer, KTT, end users, knowledge users need a synthesized body of knowledge to support and inform decisions. They cannot make a decision based on a single study. And so we need these broad synthetic analyses of a body of knowledge to help understand what works, what doesn't work, and to inform policy and practice. It's a valuable tool for identifying what is known, scientific evidence, and where we have gaps that can lead to identifying research priorities and mapping out research programs. It follows a very rigorous, standardized, systematic process of searching for the literature, selecting the appropriate studies, coding them, and synthesizing the results. And I can tell you it's a very rigorous method, and that's based on being able to be repeated and replicated. So I just want to walk you through the process that we followed for what I'm going to present to you and what's in the paper. So on the right-hand side, you're going to see this flow chart, and these are the types of flow charts you get when you follow the method for doing a knowledge synthesis. It begins with doing a very extensive literature search using a number of different databases, such as Web of Science, the CABI Digital Library, Agricola, and Agris, things like that. And what happened based on our literature search for this particular study, we ended up getting somewhere around just over 6,500 records. Now you run it through an application that removes the duplicates, and so we ended up getting somewhere down to just over 4,600. Those 4,600 papers went through a screening process where we screened the titles and abstracts of those 4,600 papers against the inclusion criteria that you see on the left-hand side. So the papers had to be in English. They had to be published between 2017 and 2021. They had to be about commercial scale agriculture in a similar production system to Canada. They had to focus on adoption of automation robotics technologies, and they had to address in some way or another barriers, drivers, determinants, the outlook for adoption, those kind of things. And you'll see that when we ran the 4,600 through this inclusion criteria using titles and abstracts, we eliminated just over 4,300 and ended up with 300 papers left. Those 300 papers went through a second screening process using the same inclusion criteria, but we used the entire document. So we had to go and find the full text documents of those 300 papers. After running the 300 papers through those inclusion criteria, we ended up with a final data set of 72 papers that we call it, like I said, is our final data set, which went through a descriptive analysis and a thematic analysis. This morning, I'm going to present part of the thematic analysis, which was what we call the determinants of adoption. We came up with 13 determinants of adoption. I'm not going to run through all 13 this morning. I've picked 4: social elements, standards, access to information, and uncertainty and risk to present this morning. If there's any others in that list that you're interested in, let me know and we can chat about them. but I'm going to start with social elements. So the adoption of automation robotics technologies is strongly influenced by a combination of cultural, societal, and ethical factors that shape farmers' attitudes and their perspectives around the benefits and risks associated with automation robotics technologies. Adoption decisions are influenced by the adoption decisions of other farmers and other stakeholders who are promoting the adoption of these technologies. And increasing consumer demands related to social imperatives like food security, climate change, biodiversity loss, sustainable production are also playing a role in shaping adoption. And we also have to start thinking about ethical considerations around adoption. The use of robots in agriculture are raising questions about environmental sustainability, economic outcomes, and social impacts. And so farmers are grappling with ethical implications of adopting these technologies. The next determinant I want to talk about are standards that serve as a pivotal determinant of adoption. They play a role in building trust, in fostering accountability, particularly when we're addressing issues around data privacy, security, ownership, and interoperability, which is not going to be anything new to the people on this call. Harmonized standards also promote transparency. They enhance data quality and facilitate more value insights and knowledge extraction from these data sets that these technologies are generating. Standards address liability concerns, ensure consistent performance and quality, and facilitate integration with existing production systems. And also, what we found interesting coming from this group of literature, these 72 papers, was that standards are playing a role in regulating stakeholder behavior, accelerating the product design and development, and facilitating investments in technology development. A recurring message from the literature was that the current lack of standards are acting as a barrier to adoption. And I don't think, again, I think we've heard this before. Access to information. Having access to information or the lack thereof affects farmers' ability to understand and then be able to implement these technologies. It encompasses a number of different aspects and elements that may not at first be considered part of access to information. This includes things like such as being aware of the technologies, availability, learning, trust, and availability of specialized advisory services. So farmers rely on various types and sources of information, and public and private research, extension, and advisory services can play a crucial role in providing access to information to support the adoption by sharing knowledge, doing training, and being involved in standardization efforts. The lack of sufficient technical support is hindering the adoption of automation robotics technologies. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about uncertainty and risk. And in a lot of cases, these two concepts are conflated. They're used as synonyms. And while there's some overlap and some complementarity, they are two distinct concepts that need to be considered separately. So when we talk about risk, we're talking about a complex relationship between a number of factors, including the nature of a technology, as well as the risk preferences of the farmer who's going to be adopting them. Risk is generally associated with variability of outcomes and the benefits. It's generally quantifiable and usually incorporated and accounted for in decision-making models. However, on the flip side, uncertainty refers to the lack of clarity and predictability about outcomes and benefits of technology, and it can lead to delays in the adoption. Uncertainty, again, stems from a range of factors, such as lack of information about how to implement a technology profitably, insufficient technical support, and unpredictability about the future, making it difficult to quantify. That's the difference. We tend to be able to quantify risk. We can't quantify uncertainty. So uncertainty acts as a barrier by increasing the perceived risks and costs of adopting a new technology. On the other hand, we saw some indication in these papers that uncertainty can also act as a driver to adoption, because there are certain technologies that reduce the uncertainties and reduce the risks that farmers are facing. So it's a little bit of a paradox around uncertainty. So to wrap up, I wanted to sort of cover about 6 takeaways that we saw from doing this work, doing this knowledge synthesis, and based on these 13 determinants. The first one, and it's not much of a revelation, adoption is complex. And complexity is a defining characteristic or feature of agricultural production systems. However, we found 3 sort of components to complexity in this work. There's social complexity, technical complexity, and biological and ecological complexity. Technical and social complexity are part of all industrial production systems. It's the biological, ecological complexity piece that adds another dimension when we think about adoption of agri-food technologies. So technical complexity emerges when we try to integrate a new technology into an existing system or an existing technology. And frequently, and we've seen this, successful adoption of a new technology requires or is dependent on the implementation of other technologies. And so this is how we get into some technical complexity. Social complexity is a combination of at least 6 of the determinants that we identified: farmer characteristics, social elements, physical infrastructure, policy and regulation, absorptive capacity of labor, and uncertainty and risk. Social complexity is also grounded in the distinct localized farming cultures in which farmers operate and from which they gain farming know-how. Biological ecological complexity results from the fact that agricultural production involves manipulating biological organisms and the ecosystems in which they exist. So unlike industrial mechanical production systems, animals and crops are highly diverse, and they respond and adapt in unpredictable ways. And so this biological ecological complexity amplifies the technical and social complexities of adoption. This leads to our second takeaway, that we need a systems approach to adoption. So adoption is not determined on the basis of a single determinant. The determinants are all interacting in complex and in some ways still unknown ways. We still don't understand how all these determinants work together to lead to adoption. So recognizing the inherent complexity of agriculture, we need to better understand the interactions around these determinants and how they shape adoption decisions. The other takeaway that we found was that adoption will not, automation and robotics technologies will not be suitable across all farm types, production systems, and commodities. Several determinants are at play in this conclusion. Farmers and their farms, even in the same commodity and in the same region, are not homogeneous. Farmers vary in terms of comfort with risk and experience and adaptability, and farms vary in terms of climate, soil, already existing infrastructures, and production systems. So automation robotics technologies will not be a viable business decision for all farm operations. There are priorities and challenges that farmers faces that may require other innovations beyond automation robotics. The next takeaway that I wanted to highlight was that policies need to be tailored to commodities and regions. The literature highlighted the need for collective policies and government solutions to drive automation and adoption, and that these collective policies need to alter the incentive structure. What we found, though, was that even though the literature said we need these alternative incentive structures, there were gaps in what those incentive structures would look like. No one was giving us examples. The other thing we found was that policymakers are under increasing pressure to develop transparent, uniform, and simple to monitor policies. This is creating a pressure for one-size-fits-all policies. This tension also leads to 2 levels of agricultural policy: those that are dealing with the entire sector, agri-food sector, and those that are dealing with specific technologies or specific commodities. And there are trade-offs between commodity and technology-specific policies and whole-sector policies. However, what we took from the literature was that it appears that policies tailored to specific commodities and regions will be more effective in driving adoption of automation robotics technologies. The next takeaway was trust and transparency are critical, central to adoption. This was a recurring narrative across several determinants. Technology developers need to take seriously farmers' concerns about data privacy, ownership, security, as well as technology performance and reliability. Technologies that protect farmers' privacy will be adopted at higher rates than those that do not. And importantly, technologies that demonstrate tangible benefits and are perceived to be more reliable and meet performance specifications are more widely adopted. And this leads to our final takeaway. Automation robotics technologies must represent solutions to real agricultural production problems and must directly address farmers' needs for more efficient resource use, increased productivity, and enhanced environmental sustainability. Technology developers who lack an understanding of their end users' problems and actual needs will find it very difficult to succeed in agricultural automations and robotics technology market. However, the diversity of agriculture, farm sizes, production systems, commodities, environmental conditions are posing challenges to identify actual problems with a scale and scope that represent a viable market worth pursuing. So this is definitely a challenge for technology developers. And I'll just close with saying that this knowledge synthesis piece was part of a larger project that I was involved in as a postdoc at Brock that looked at the adoption of automation robotics technologies, and there were a number of different other pieces of the project. And so if you're interested in those results, all the reports from that project are available on my website. And I will just open it up to questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Amy. That was it's a very broad topic to have to present in a very short amount of time. So I think you did a very good job of kind of touching on all your key points.
Yeah.
There are a few people I did need to mute just because it was coming through with feedback. So just in case you are trying to talk and it's not coming through, that's why. But we will now open it up to questions if anyone has a question for Amy. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind, I'm just going to have you remove the screen share just so that we can see people's faces when they're asking questions.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So we're going to go with Evan first.
Hi there. Thanks.
Hi, Evan.
Hopefully you can hear me all right. You can hear me?
Uh-huh.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks. I mean, it's super interesting, Amy, and I know we've talked in the past, so thanks. It was great to see you here, actually. This is super. I wondered, in the groups that you got together for some of this research over time, did they share with you where groups of growers go typically, or where, is a trusted resource for validation and so on? Are there areas where they look? Is it always the Netherlands? Is it, where is the big well of trust at the moment mostly located? Because I know we're all working hard, including this robotics group, to build testing and demonstration capacity for well at the moment, if you know.
So this particular piece of work did not look at that, but some of my past work, especially the robotics project at Brock. So we tend to look at the sort of, rather than a geographic sort of focus, we're looking at sources and types of information. And I can tell you from past research that farmers are particularly find things like they trust scientists, particularly, which was an interesting finding. They also trust, yeah, Dave, I saw you go, what? Yeah, for sure. They do trust scientists and researchers. They also find OMAFA production specialists and IPM specialists particularly trustable and useful. In terms of types of information, so when I say sources, I mean those are the organizations or people that are delivering the message, and the types of information are the ways that the information is delivered. And things like definitely field demonstration sites, information fact sheets are again mostly the most useful and frequently used by farmers.
Thanks a lot, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy. So I do see Katan has a question, but we're going to go Chuck and then we'll go to you, Katan.
So I had a couple of things, and one of the things that I might challenge on a little bit, like you had talked about privacy and reliability and all those kinds of things, And when that is being presented, sometimes that gets presented like they are equal. And I would argue that a farmer might not rate privacy of data at the same level as reliability of the equipment.
Oh, no, Chuck,
Right.
I agree with you.
And I think we need to be careful when we're presenting these things. Because as a farmer, I just tune right out when people start telling me that my data privacy is on the same level as climate change, for example, or reliability of the equipment. I'm going to say nope.
And you've raised a really good issue or priority for research, because I don't know that we've done that kind of ranking.
Mhm.
And that's a really good idea to go ahead and sort of try and find where farmers rate these challenges and these barriers.
Right. Yeah. And then my other question that I was going to ask, and this is just a more of a process question, and don't take this as an offense or something, but I've seen other researchers put together, this meta-analysis of studies, for example. But how do we learn anything new from doing that? That's my question to you. Like how do we, as someone who looks at this report, how do we say, how does that turn into new information? I'm curious about that on the process.
So I think it turns into new information because we're consolidating it across, like I say, a body of knowledge. And it also, one of the real benefits, it all depends on the question. So these meta-analyses are driven by very specific questions. And so you have to develop the question. If you want to learn something new, then you develop the question to say, okay, what's new in this body of knowledge? You can also question, okay, where are the gaps? And I'm finding that that's the real compelling piece when I'm talking to people about doing these knowledge synthesis is identifying the gaps in knowledge, which then identify research priorities and help us to make decisions around what we're going to prioritize and develop long-term research programs. They tend to be, so this is somewhat of an academic exercise. So the next step from this is to turn it to, apply, I need to walk the talk on KTT and move this into something that's more manageable and usable. And that's the next step. And, based on this piece, this knowledge synthesis piece, and the other pieces from the bigger project of my postdoc research at Brock, I now have a bunch of different analyses around determinants of adoption. And we need to bring those into plain language and syntheses and interpretations. Yeah.
Thanks.
If I can add an opinion on that, Chuck, I think the meta-analysis is fantastic, but it mainly gives you data to do prioritization, not new information.
Well,
so
and I
you
think
know what to start with first to get the
Right.
biggest bang for your buck.
Yeah.
And instead of following your gut.
Well, I think maybe the gaps that Amy talked about is probably the most insightful piece.
Yeah.
What areas have already been beating a dead horse, and what areas have we already studied to death, and what areas are we missing?
The other piece too is because these are global analyses, the opportunity is to find what's going on elsewhere that we can use to adapt and adopt in Canada or in Ontario.
Thanks, Amy. I do have a follow-up to that, but I'll go into Katan's question. So he said, great topic. How did you select the four criteria that you discussed, and why those criteria?
You mean the determinants, the 4 determinants of the 13 that I picked?
Yes.
So how did I pick them? I picked them because I thought that they represented less common determinants than we normally see in this type of work. I wanted to, like, when you think about, we all know that farmer characteristics and farm characteristics play a role, but I wanted to sort of focus in on some of the things that may not be as intuitive as a determinant. Yeah.
So just a quick follow-up. Would there be was any of the other determinants carry more weight to determine the farmer's behavior for adopting?
So we didn't look at that. And again, that comes back to Chuck's comment, which I agree, we definitely start to need to do. I think we've got a massive body of knowledge now on determinants of adoption. And what we need to start doing is understanding which ones are more influential than others. But we didn't, the studies that we picked did not provide that kind of data. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Just kind of a question coming from that for the group, because I don't see any other hands up. So when you were looking, and this could be for anybody, like broadly out there, in terms of a framework that helps you adopt something like in the industry, is there anybody that's kind of seen like a checklist or something that they think this really narrows down and makes simplified essentially kind of all the topics that Amy's talking about in terms of, I want a checklist to say, is this product worth buying or not? And it could be not necessarily agriculture, like any industry.
I don't know of one, but I will say that there are now a lot of what are called technology readiness level scales.
Yeah.
So it was originally developed by NASA. And now people are developing these scales in different product sectors, so different industrial sectors. So there's now a manufacturability scale. There's a ready for product launch scale. There might be something which is a early adoption of technology scale. I don't know, but they're very popular right now. These ideas of how mature is it? What evidence and data do I have that it actually is what it says it is? Because we all know that some products are more sales than function. And so, you know, the more data you get, that's why the demonstrations in the field are often extremely convincing.
Well, and one of the things that muddies the water a little bit, David, is that, and Amy touched on this with the funding grants and the way that they're written, is sometimes the funding grants are very specific as to what TRL level, and people will twist their robot to say a robot that might be an 8, they'll call it a 6, just so that it fits the funding grant, or a robot that's a 5, they'll call it an 8, just so it fits the funding grant. And that muddies the waters for farmers and people that are analyzing the products as well.
And I also think that we need to develop those type of checklists and tools specific to agriculture. For sure, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, David. And Ian.
Thanks very much for that. It was really intriguing. Lots of questions that come to mind from that. Just want to make a couple of comments. In my, a lot of years of experience with farmers, and Chuck and some of the other farmers might roll their eyes or shake their heads at me, but two things is, a farm business is different than almost any other type of business in that many of the people that are in it, if not most, grew up in that farm from a wee kid to where they're farming. And my concern about that is that their identification of risk is different than people that have not grown up in it and have come into the industry. And sometimes they miss those that other people would quickly identify as risk. They don't, because it hasn't bit them in the butt before. And so they just carry on and don't think it's going to happen. And so I think when we ask questions about risk to farmers in surveys and stuff like that, we have to be very careful with what that question is to make sure that we're getting the right answer from them, because we can make wrong interpretations depending on how those questions. And I guess that's true of every survey thing. And the other side of things is financially, farmers talk a mean streak on ROI, but they don't tend to live it as well as what they perceive. So Chuck and I have been in the field at demonstrations where people have come after us, well, what the heck's the ROI on that, right? Like, how could I ever make that work? And we go, well, today it's terrible because it's brand new technology that, they're trying to recapture some investment in and stuff, but it will get better with time. And then you ask the question, what's your current ROI? And you get the deer in the headlights thing, because they really don't know. Farmers know if they're profitable or not, but they don't tend to know their cost of production on a per bushel or a per acre basis from field to field. And it's knowing those values that allow decision-making to enhance improvements, because we don't make big improvements by large changes. We make them by multiple small changes. And so that's problematic. And just we need to keep that in mind in terms of how we converse with farmers and that. And then the other piece of that, and Chuck, don't roll your eyes at me, a lot of farm investments are made on emotional reasoning much more than financial reasoning. And that's something that, especially during good times, that's easy to do. It's been interesting to watch the last few months and how people's attitudes and stuff have changed because of the commodity prices and the grain sector specifically. But I think this is all stuff that we have to be aware of. It's not like, some other type of business, and it's not good or bad. It's just something different that we have to recognize and be able to address it in that understanding. I'll shut up now.
I'm not rolling my eyes, Ian. I'm probably agreeing with you on most cases.
Pretty good summary of like a large variety of the
Uh-huh.
kind of struggles with all the adoption stuff.
I mean, a perfect example is, what's the criteria for buying a $250,000 new tractor?
You can't
I
even
would
buy
say-
one. You can't even buy one for that now. Come on.
Okay, 500,000. I would say the first criteria is status.
Yep.
Second is functionality.
And I had this exact debate, David, with a person who was talking to me about, and he's looking at buying a robot, and the robot's going to be $550,000. And the task that he wanted to do with that robot, I challenged him and I said, like, you realize that an $18,000 articulating tractor from 1982 would probably do a better job. And so, if you're talking about ROI, you're trying to compare, like, what are you actually trying to do here? And are you measuring your costs correctly? And he kind of looked at me and said, aren't you trying to sell robots? I said, I am, but you're trying to get me to compare a $500,000 machine versus a $20,000 machine. And that ROI is not going to work. And I'm not going to be able to make it work. And so let's be real about what you're actually trying to get to. Now, if you want to get to the fact that you don't want to be sitting in the tractor seat, that you've got 1,000 acres of contiguous land that this thing can do tillage on, and that honestly driving a tractor is not your favorite thing to do, you'd rather be doing anything else. Well, now we start to say this is where the robot starts to make sense. And I cannot take your $20,000 old tractor and make it autonomous. That's grossly unsafe. It won't work. This is where the $500,000 machine makes way more sense. And this gets into the emotional considerations, the other factors that Ian is talking about. Plus, this guy wants to be first. Okay. And that's also the status symbol. Sorry, Daryl, we kept cutting you off. And you
that's okay.
You just got to butt in.
I can't figure out where to raise my hand, so I just raising my real hand here. So it's a novel idea, but I appreciate Ian's comments a lot because that resonates with me a lot. But Amy, thank you for your presentation, really interesting, and I do find a lot of utility in knowledge synthesis and meta-analysis because it's, if you don't do that, it's just once this study says this and this study says something else and this study says this, and which one do I believe, right? Because that's what we hear a lot from farmers and people that work with farmers. And well, what's the right answer? Just tell me what the right answer is. So but what I've been interested in for a while in this realm is, and Ian and you both got at it a little bit, is the characteristics of the farmer, because I'm guilty of it all the time when we talk about farmers as some homogenous group, right? So did you get into anything that looks at more trying to create a typology of the different farmers? We talk a lot about the adoption and the laggards and the innovators and the early adopters and that sort of thing. But I think it really comes into this. It's not just, what's the ROI and what's the payoff for me and what's motivating me, and do I believe my neighbor more than the government or the ag specialist, but have you looked at that sort of thing? Because that's a whole nother level, right?
Yeah, and so there's all kinds of literature out there about the farmer characteristics, demographics, the education age. And what you find from the literature is there's really a lack of consistency in whether or not age is a determinant to adoption. I mean, when we say older farmers are less likely to adopt, and we tend to make the conclusion that that's because they're more risk averse, when in most cases it's because they're approaching retirement and they're not going to make a major investment in a new technology when they don't have the time to get that ROI. So I'm a little bit reluctant to put a lot of to base farmer characteristics as a major determinant on adoption. I think we need to do a lot more research. I mean, it's sociology, right? When we talk about complexity, you know, social people are incredibly complex. And so, but I get your point about the homogeny. We tend to talk about, like you say, farmers, like we talk about dairy farmers being this homogenous group of people, when in fact, there's so much diversity there. How do you really tease out whether or not it's their age, their education, what their political standing is? So I think it's important and the other point that I often question is, we put this emphasis on farmer characteristics, but we can't change it. And so what does that mean when we're talking about understanding adoption? We can't change a farmer's age. We can't change the demographics around a farmer. So I think
I think it just means like it changes how we look at how we think adoption is going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, the consistency, because you know, you could have two farmers in the same age group, but with a different education level and a different size farm, and it changes the whole decision-making process.
Well, and it's not just age as well,
Thank
Daryl
you.
and Amy. The financial position changes the risk tolerance that farming operation has. So if you're 25 years old and good on a computer, and you're mortgaged to the hilt, your risk tolerance for trying something new is pretty low. If you are 65 years old and all your farms are paid for, and you might not know how to run your VCR, your ability to change might be more apt because you can afford to. You know, there's lots of things that go into this, and I agree. Farmers are not homogenous, and that's one of the dangers that we run into. And when I have robotics companies pitch to me about how much money they're going to make selling their robots, generally what they do is they take the number of farmers in that commodity times the number of acres times this many dollars, and we're all going to make millions of bucks. And the reality is it's not that simple.
No. And Chuck, I'm just going to follow up on that again. It's not that simple because, you know, we're looking at one determinant, and that's farmer characteristics. And as I said, adoption is not based on one determinant. We need to think about how, and you made the point about financial resources, again, bringing in a totally different determinant. So.
I want to ask a question, but I don't expect an answer. Amy, have you done any demographic studies, more phenotyping and characterization of farms over the last 30, 40 years? In other words, I mean, the whole farming community is changing.
Yeah.
It's becoming less family farms, more corporate farms. And if I was a betting man, I would say that probably 90% of farms in 20 to 30 years are going to be corporate farms. Maybe owned by a family, but they're going to be bigger. They're going to be businesses. They're going to be more like Chuck, and they're going to be less like mom and pop and two kids running a farm. And that changes decision-making, talent, assessment of opportunity, access to money, understanding risk, and probably profitability, although it does, I know, erode the whole family structure. But how fast is that changing? I mean, do we have 20% corporate farms, or do we have 50% corporate farms? Because if we're going to be thinking, we also have to think about the future. How do we position ourselves to work with the people that are going to be around in 10 years, not the people that are probably not going to be around in 10 years?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. And I mean, everyone's raising the sort of point that I made about the determinants working together and the complexity that's involved here. And you're identifying questions to try and unpack that complexity.
Thanks, Amy and David. And I will, Kristen's put 2 comments in the chat, but I would say that second one, depending on the sector, like, I don't even, if you look around in the neighborhoods that you're in, right? Like, my parents live on a grain farm, and just looking around the neighborhood, like, there's lots of small parcels, but they're all typically just worked by 1 or 2 farmers now, but that depends on what industry they're in. If they're in poultry or dairy, I would say that that's a much different, it's different because of the supply management. And I don't know if others find that, but that throws off your whole thing as well because it's a very different type of farm. Okay, so we are getting close to 10 o'clock, so I'm going to go to Ian and then Tarl. And then if you guys have further questions on this topic, we can revisit it again at a future week, maybe as a panel discussion, because I think it's got a lot of interest. So Ian, take it away.
Just to comment on the homogeny of farms, I agree that they are quite diverse. And part of the problem is, in my dealings with policy, is that policy is looking for a simple decision or a simple path forward when it's really complex. And it tends to be policy people, and again, I can get myself in trouble, but tend to be more humanities people than science people. And we need the bridge of both. But it's, I guess I'm saying to the group, it behooves us to be part of that policy making thing such that we don't lose the complexity, which can be a killer for us, and that we get policies out there that the ag community can deal with and live with. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Ian. Tarl.
Hi, Amy. This is a very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed, I think, and it's very helpful, the work I do. But I have a question about the methodology, because I think the systematic literature review that you used is very powerful tool. But then you also mentioned about the meta-analysis, right? And I was just thinking about, like, one of the challenge that we also found that it's very difficult to do meta-analysis, especially the study that being done in robotics and like an AI in agriculture. One of the condition for meta-analysis that the studies conducted, it has to be like similar methods, similar context, so you can like compare and have a kind of synthesis on a specific aspect. I don't know whether the literature that you actually analyzed, it has like similar kind of methods or similar kind of, or is it like more synthesis of multiple studies?
Yeah, and so you'll see the title of the paper that got accepted was a mixed method narrative interpretive. So it was not, a meta-analysis tends to suggest that it's quantitative and there's statistical analyses, and you do have to be very specific in the types of studies that you accept through that eligibility screening process. And it becomes very quantitative. What I'm focusing on is the more qualitative, and that's why I call it a knowledge synthesis. And I tend to use, and mixed methods means I'm looking at studies that were qualitative and quantitative and doing that descriptive analysis. The descriptive analysis is just, okay, how many papers across what years were published, what types of studies, what types of commodities, who are the authors, that type of thing. And then the thematic analysis speaks directly to the question that you pose at the beginning as part of your methodology, right? And so, the thematic analysis is a little bit of a different approach to knowledge synthesis. And if you go to the knowledge synthesis literature, there's all kinds of different terminologies. And so you have to be really specific in describing your method, your approach. And I tend to use the standards from the Collaboration for Environmental Collaboration group, and they have guidelines and standards for how to do a knowledge synthesis or an evidence synthesis. Meta-analysis is a totally different process, and yeah, so the studies in the 72 papers that we worked with, we could not do a meta-analysis on.
Right. Yeah,
it's a meta-analysis. Yeah.
No, I think we can still do meta-analysis of qualitative studies as long as there are a lot of similarities between this.
Exactly.
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Thanks. I just
because
talk
about, though. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you both. All right, so that does wrap up our questions for today for Amy's presentation. If you do have any further ones, you can reach out to the AgRobotics Working Group. We'll connect you with Amy directly. but I think we definitely can revisit this topic at a later date. I do apologize as well. If you are new and you do not know how to raise your hand for future meetings, it is under the React button. You hit that heart in the bottom of your screen and it'll open a panel that gives you the option to raise your hand. So Dan and I will fix that for next week so that we actually mention that. Second thing is just going into the agenda. It was sent out to everybody this past week, so I'm not going to touch on all the events, but FIRA USA is ongoing currently. We do have coming up November 6th. Oh, I think that one actually might be changing. Can you confirm, Chuck, if it's still November 6th?
It's changed again, November 14th.
Okay.
November
So
14th.
new date to be confirmed. We'll send
November
that out with the
14th.
updated
Yeah.
agenda.
Weather, so basically, the only thing we got to wait for there is the weather, right?
Okay.
November 14th.
Great, thank you. And we have a networking reception November 6th and Agriculture and Light November 7th, both in Manitoba. And Kristen will be presenting at the Ontario Pest Management Conference November 7th. And we have the 2024 Thrive Global Impact Summit that John had presented on a few weeks ago. That's taking place in California, and there is a promo code if you do want to attend that one. It's Ontario 50, I believe. So if you do need that code, just let us know. We can send it to you. Any other events that are not on this list that someone wanted to mention just briefly?
There's, I believe, Mary Ruth is at the Vegetable Summit in Kitchener, speaking the end of November. I think that's, I don't know that if she's on the call here. I don't think so. I think they're down at California, but I know that she is at on the agenda speaking at that. And Jason from our group is speaking at the Ontario Young Farmers Forum, I think the day after. And then the Great Lakes Ag Expo is in December. And we will be attending that along with several other people. So I think it's December the 12th or something like that in Michigan.
Excellent. Thanks, Chuck. We'll get those added to the list. Okay. Seeing no other events, we are going to move into the funding announcements. So their list is in there from the agenda, but I did have somebody reach out mentioning that they did have a funding announcement to touch base on. Katan.
Morning, guys. Just wanted to update on everybody's favorite topic, AI. So the federal government in the previous budget had announced, a large $2 billion investment to help companies innovate in AI. That's a big, broad statement. Some of that money has trickled down to IRAP. And primarily, the problem this money is supposed to solve is, we were talking about scales earlier, which is companies feel they need to use AI to solve a core business problem, but they have no idea how to figure out A, what to solve, and B, how to solve it. This money is supposed to help assess a company by either helping you figure out what you could do with the data you've collected, or where do you stand on the maturity of the data you already have from an AI perspective, which is, do you have the right governance procedures? Do you have the right security procedures? If you implement AI, will you be messing things up or not? And so there's 3 different categories. Talk to your local IRAP representative and ask them how this funding can help with all the data. Because like I said, the number one problem is people don't know what to do with the data and so unless you've got an AI expert on your team, you're lost. And you're reaching out there to figure out, what do I do with it? We've got AI experts who will sit with you and help you figure out where you stand and how to maybe even construct a project to get you better. Okay, so talk to IRAP.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay. If there are not any other funding announcements, and or I'll say open to roundtable just because we're getting close to the end. All right, thanks everybody. So we will for next week, we'll be back with Dan for next week, but I do want to mention we did get some good responses from the survey that we sent out regarding the meeting format. If you haven't had a chance to fill that out yet, I just threw the link in the chat, but we have received a number of responses, so thank you to those that did submit those. And if there are no further comments or questions for this week, then we will say goodbye for this week and we will see you next week. Excellent. Okay, I'll see everybody next week. Thanks again, Amy, for your presentation.